Welcome to Law Awareness Weeks at CDC 2020, The Law and Me Stronger Together. Organized by Law Society, Pro Bono Services, and the 5 Community Development Councils, supported by People's Association, National University of Singapore Faculty of Law, Singapore Management University, School of Law, Singapore University of Social Sciences, and Singapore Corporate Counsel Association. I'm Jeannie Gan, your host for today's webinar on working from home PDPA considerations for businesses and employees. Just some housekeeping before we get started. First, relevant materials for today's talk can be downloaded from the handout section, which you can see on your screen. If you are using a mobile phone or tablet, the icons should appear on your top right-hand corner. On your computer, you should see the icons on the right. So please download these useful materials before the end of the talk. Feel free to ask any question at all during the webinar. You can type them into the questions section and click send. Your questions will only be seen by the organizer. We'll do our very best to address them during the talk or at the end of the talk. Please note that the discussion and any material provided in this webinar is not intended to substitute or constitute as professional legal advice. You should consult a lawyer if you require specific legal advice. With us today as our panelist is Mr. Feng Wei Li. Wei Li is director at DC Law and is experienced in commercial and civil litigation, including arbitration and mediation. Wei Li enjoys sharing his experience, and he is an active member of the Law Awareness Committee and is often invited to conduct public talks and seminars aimed at promoting legal knowledge and awareness among laypersons. He has also authored chapters and guidebooks and publications that provide legal information to workers, freelancers, and members of the media and artistic community. Besides practicing law, Wei Li lectures on a part-time basis at the Singapore Management University's School of Law. Wei Li, thank you for joining us today. Let's get right into the discussion, shall we?
Thank you, Jeannie. Very happy to be here.
Thank you. Welcome. Well, today we're, of course, talking about PDPA and obligations and such are, of course, inevitable. The COVID-19 has drastically transformed many aspects of our daily lives, how we live, how we interact, and also how we work. Due to the measures put in place to ensure our safety and limit the spread of the coronavirus, many employees have begun to work from home, only going to the office if strictly necessary or not at all. And businesses have therefore increasingly found themselves carrying out their day-to-day operations out of homes, out of their personal spaces, almost overnight. And this means that a great deal of data is being processed in employees' homes, on personal devices, and being transferred across home networks. What are the implications on data protection? What should businesses and employees do to prevent security breaches and protect data belonging to themselves and consumers? Well, incidentally, in a recent global corporate IT security risks survey, which a leading provider of cybersecurity solutions and services did, we found that data protection remains the #1 topmost concerning IT security issue among businesses. So let's start by understanding what obligations businesses are under to protect data. And I'm going to ask Wei Li to start with what kind of information would be considered personal data.
Thanks, Jeannie. The data protection regime in Singapore is governed by a principal piece of legislation called the Personal Data Protection Act. We commonly refer to this legislation as the PDPA for short. The interesting thing about the PDPA is that it doesn't contain a comprehensive or a detailed definition of what amounts to personal data. Instead, the PDPA defines personal data very, very loosely and very broadly. Personal data is defined as data about an individual from which you can identify the individual. So I think one way of characterizing personal data would be to ask yourself whether or not from this piece of data you can actually identify a person. right?
Mm.
So although the PDPA doesn't give you a fixed list of what constitutes personal data, we generally accept certain classes of information as amounting to personal data. And these common classes of information include things like a person's full name, NRIC number, of course, mobile number, landline number, email address, physical home address. Now, the interesting thing to note is that even a person's image, let's say a photograph or a video, or a person's voice can constitute personal data, because naturally you would be able to identify a person from his or her voice, or from his or her own image that's captured in a photo or a video. Now,
Mm.
one important thing to note also would be to understand what does not amount to personal data, right? And the PDPA makes it quite clear that if you are giving somebody information about yourself for a business purposes, for example, if you exchange name cards, right? Or if you are, let's say, exchanging contact details at a networking session, then data that passes hands under this kind of circumstances would not amount to personal data.
Mm. Okay. Oh, wow. The part about facial image and voice perhaps might be a surprise to some people, actually. So that's very interesting over that. And so then my next question would be, what are businesses expected to do to protect personal data?
Right. This is a question that we as lawyers get quite a lot and this question comes not only from small businesses and SMEs who are starting up their operations, but also from the larger organizations who've been in business for quite a while. So the starting point is this. Organizations are ultimately responsible for the personal data it collects. And organizations can collect this personal data from a variety of people, right? Most straightforward would be when organizations collect data from their consumers or their customers. Organizations can also collect and store personal data from their employees, right? The workforce, people they hire and employ. So at the very bottom line is this: organizations have a obligation to care for or to take care of their personal data, right? Organizations must implement policies, right, to meet these obligations and communicate these policies to their staff, so that everybody through rank and file will know what they can or cannot do in order to comply with data protection obligations. Now, after hearing what I said, you may say, wow, so broad. What specifically am I supposed to do? I mean, it's very easy to say I must care for personal data. It's very easy to say I must protect personal data. But specifically, what does the PDPA say I as an organization need to do? The bad news is that, again, the PDPA doesn't set out a comprehensive list of what must be done. Rather, this obligation is, again, like the definition of personal data, broadly worded. But more specifically, the business and the data protection community have come to accept that there are a number of things, right, or a number of obligations that are common across businesses and industries, if we need to start talking about obligations on a more specific level. Now, first and foremost, an organization needs to obtain consent, right, from the people whose data they are collecting, right? Put different, an individual must give consent to the organization to use, to manage, and to retain the data. And I think most of us would have come across this at one point or another in our daily lives, right? For example, when we sign up for a mobile plan, we register for a gym membership, or when we, let's say, make a purchase online, you will almost always realize that you will be asked to agree to the fact that this particular business is going to be, right? Sometimes the interface, let's say when you buy something online, may require you to tick a box which says, I consent to my data being collected and used. If you are signing up for a membership at the gym using a pen and paper kind of sign-in form, the sign-up form may also have a box which says I and you may have to tick that, right? So this is an example of how businesses and organizations obtain consent from individuals whose data they are collecting, right? So that's the first and foremost, a very basic obligation. Now, of course, after a business collects the data with the consent, the next obligation up the rung of what businesses need to do would be to commit themselves to protecting the data that they've collected, right? And protecting the data would mean taking steps to prevent unauthorized access of the data, unauthorized collection, unauthorized use, unauthorized disclosure. The business must also take steps to make sure that the data it collects is not copied, it's not modified, or it's not disposed of in a cavalier manner, right? So some common ways by which businesses try to comply to these obligations to protect data would be to procure data protection solutions from IT companies. And some of these solutions can include things like firewalls, VPNs, right, to prevent unauthorized intrusions or hacking into the company's database. There are also IT providers out there that provide more specific data protection kind of solutions or programs. And some of these more specific programs can include solutions that help you safeguard, let's say, a client list or a CRM system that comes together with, let's say, a bundled client information protection system, right? Now, that's one way of protecting data. The other way, or the other major avenue by which businesses protect data that they collect, would be actually through educating their employees, right? Procuring the hardware is not enough. A business must also ensure that its employees through rank and file know the importance of data protection, right? The business must also ensure that the employees are familiar with what steps to take at personal level in their day-to-day work when ensuring to ensure that the data of their consumers and whoever they collect the data from is well protected. So in summary, we have two main obligations that a business must meet. First is really the technical part, right? Seeing what kind of hardware and software to procure, make sure that you prevent unauthorized access. The other is really the human aspect, or the human touch point, to educate your employees on what they need to do in order to make sure that data obligations, or rather data protection obligations, are being complied with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. And I'm still staying on PDPA obligations for now.
Sure.
But before I move on to ask about what we can do if there is a data breach, I'll park that aside for a short while because we've got a question that just come in.
Okay.
I think is a follow-up to the earlier discussion about identification of people through personal data. Identifiable information, right? So I think the question that's being asked is, what is the extent of identifying a person using personal data? I think maybe it's a lay person who's asking this. Basically, he or she is saying, is it as long as it can be used by a small group or some close associates who presumably know the person extra well, to identify the person is considered personal data, is identifiable? Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the question. Whether or not a person is identifiable from a piece of data is a function of two factors, right? First, how obvious that personal data is, right? So, for example, if that data we're talking about is somebody's, let's say, full name, right, and that person has a rather unique name, then I think it can be said that without controversy that the full name is a piece of personal data that requires protection. Likewise, a photograph of somebody, that's also undoubtedly a piece of personal data because you can quite easily identify somebody through a photo nowadays. If you don't already know, you could technically take a photo, upload it onto Google, and do what we call a reverse image search.
Yeah.
And Google will actually be able to tell you where this image is from. So, for example, if I have a photo of Jeannie, right, I upload it and I do a reverse image search, I may obtain search results that take me to Jeannie's, for example, LinkedIn page, where that same photo is being displayed. And from that LinkedIn page, I can very, very easily identify who this person is, right? So in a situation that I would say a photo amounts to personal data. Now, of course, there lies the question also. Let's say if an email address, for example, right, by itself, without any other accompanying data. Let's say the email address is hellokitty123@gmail.com. Is this data?
There may just be an email address like that, by the way.
Is this data personal data? Because that person's name's not in the email address anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's a very generic address. Now, I think the answer to that would be, could be, could not be, right? Again, I could essentially take that email address, go online, and then run a search. And if somebody, or rather the owner of that email address, has actually used that address to set up a Facebook account, for example, right? Facebook will tell me, hey, this email address belongs to this person. And here you go, this person's name is so-and-so. In a situation like that, yes, that email address, even though it doesn't state the person's name, can amount to personal data because it allows you to identify a person.
Okay.
So I think to answer the question that came in, there is no hard and fast rule as to what's personal data and what's not. There is no fixed formula. Whether or not a piece of information amounts to personal data really depends on the circumstances, right? And the amount of collateral information that you can actually extract using that piece of information, should you be inclined to go online and to search or to probe further. Yeah.
Okay. Right. I think we got that question answered. Then I sort of want to bring us back to our discussion where we left off, because you were last answering, well, talking about what are businesses expected to do to protect personal data, right? So now the follow-up question that I have for you is that if there is a data breach, so unfortunately it's happened, and there's some leak in the data, would the employee who has caused the breach and or his employer be liable? What is your take on that? Yeah.
Good question. Good question. Again, this is something that we get asked quite often. Businesses will come and ask us, hey, I'm doing what I can to protect my data, right? But touch wood, in the event something goes south, who is liable? I think the straightforward answer to that would be this. If a breach happens, okay, and the business is registered, let's say, as a corporate entity, as a company, which is the case with most businesses, the PDPC, Personal Data Protection Commission, which is the governmental body that is responsible for ensuring that companies comply with data protection obligations. Think of the PDPC as the data protection discipline master, right? Okay. If there is a breach, the PDPC will go after the company first as the first measure. Right? And if after investigations, the PDPC come to the conclusion that the company actually did fall short of its data protection obligations, the company can be fined. Fines have been issued out before. Many fines actually have been issued by the PDPC before. Now, the maximum fine that the PDPC can issue is, I think, if I'm not wrong, up to $1 million. But that has never happened. I think the highest fine so far, practically, it's about 50 over 60,000. Don't quote me on that figure. I can't remember offhand. But the fines can range, range from tens of thousands to hundreds over thousands, depending on how severe the breach is. Okay, and I think if I'm not wrong, in 2019, if my memory serves me right, the PDPC actually met out a total of $1.2 something million worth of fines to various organizations organizations
I
and
think you're right.
companies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back to what we were talking about. First port of call, if there's a breach, PDPC will go after the company and find the company. But okay, I think it's important also for businesses to know this, right? If the PDPC does its investigations and finds out that the breach was caused by serious negligence on the part of a senior officer within the company, and when I say
Mm,
senior officer, I mean key position holders like CEOs, CFOs, directors, what have you not, right?
mm,
Senior management. If the PDPC finds out that senior management actually caused the breach, the person, the management himself or herself, the key officer himself or herself, may be liable personally. So what this
okay.
means is that key officer himself herself may be fined personally, right? Or worse, if the breach is serious or a repeated breach, the key officer himself or herself may be slapped with a jail term penalty.
Okay.
Uh, that's rare, but doesn't change the fact that the PDPA actually makes it possible for senior management officers within an organization to be punished personally, right? Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. But it's not mutually exclusive, right? So the company can be liable and
can
key position holder can also,
also
right.
be liable. Yeah, so
Mm,
it's not an either or situation. Uh,
mm,
it could be a situation where both the company and the officer gets punished, right? The
mm,
company
mm,
gets fined, and then the officer himself or herself may also have to fork out a fine from his or her own pocket,
mm.
or worse, serve a jail term. So data protection
Yeah.
obligations aren't a joke. The PDPC actually takes them quite seriously,
Yeah, yeah,
especially
yeah.
they investigate and they find out that the company has fallen grossly short of certain
Mm,
obligations.
mm,
Yeah.
mm. And I suppose the message to send is, even though the PDPC has to date, well, the fines meted out have been reasonably, well, relatively modest as compared to the maximum possible sanction. It doesn't mean that it won't in the future. So it's best, of course, to be careful as well and to take it seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And okay. And someone in the room actually has posed a question. Of
Mhm.
course, I'm gonna put it to Whaley. What are the essential obligations to be observed by a registered society? I suppose non-profit. Are there any? Is there any difference in terms of obligations from a business, which you've talked about earlier?
Hmm. It is a good question, and I think that the question can be dealt with rather simply by me saying that there's no difference. The law doesn't, as far as it as far as data protection is concerned, the PDPA doesn't make the distinction between, let's say, a for-profit on the one hand and a non-profit society on the other hand. So as long as you are an organization registered under the laws of Singapore, you must comply with the obligations under the PDPA.
Mm, okay, it's not like they're going to be more lenient on non-profits now. Okay, can.
No, no. And let me explain to you why. Let me explain to you why. I think we can all think of situations where a non-profit can sometimes handle data that's far more sensitive than a for-profit. Let's
Mm,
say I register a ground up initiative. It's a non-profit, right? And my ground up initiative provides a service to less privileged families, for example. I teach children from less privileged families how to read. Okay.
mm,
Uh, and in doing so, I collect information from these less privileged families, and the information can include things like names, where the children go to school at, and to
mm,
decide whether or not I can provide them the service, I may even have to collect very sensitive information such as income levels, right? So I can
yeah.
decide whether or not they pass a certain or they fail a certain means test. Now,
Mm,
I think it's not difficult to then appreciate how information like this can really be a lot more sensitive than information that a for-profit, let's say a blog shop,
Yeah,
collects.
yeah,
So, there could be a situation, there could be an argument run in such a case to say that non-profits should actually be held to a higher standard than
yeah,
a for-profit. But
yeah,
fortunately for non-profits, there is no such higher threshold. Like I
yeah,
said earlier, the law regards all organizations as being equal. As long as you are an organization registered under Singapore laws, you have to comply
mm.
with the obligations under the PDPA.
Okay, yeah. So there's parity in treatment, and I think, but what Whaley said is, if I may add on, is that whether non-profit or for-profit, the impact if there's a data breach, and just by virtue of the fact of the nature of the data, um, its sensitivity and its potential damage to the person, can be quite far-reaching as well, even if it's non-profit. Yeah. So I
You're
hope that
absolutely
question has been answered. Yeah. So I have okay. I have someone
Mhm.
who is asking this question. I am not sure if it is related to PDPA. I often receive calls pretending to be calls from DHL, DBS Bank, and
Mhm.
sometimes even from Ministry of Law. It is
Mhm.
quite annoying. I've already registered my mobile phone under no call list.
Mhm.
What should I do to give myself a peace of mind? Yeah,
To whoever who asked this question, you are not alone. I receive
yeah,
these
me
calls
too.
as
Every
well.
day.
Yeah,
Like
it's
every other
affecting
day,
me.
somebody wants to give me money.
Yeah, they're always asking for money from us, but I don't get a call which says that. I mean, yeah, like sometimes they try to get money from you by bluffing you that you have won money lah. But anyway,
Yeah.
that aside, sadly, this doesn't come under the remit of the PDPA. Why? It's a scam call. And I'll tell you why the PDPA doesn't apply. Now, if you remember, right, the PDPA imposes obligations only on registered organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And these people who are making the scam calls are probably not registered here. It's probably coming from
Yeah.
some scam HQ in some other country, right? And these people don't, whoever is conducting these scams don't technically, well, have to comply with the PDPA,
Yeah.
right? So if you, I understand that you may have registered to put yourself on the do not call registry. The do not call registry only prevents legitimate local companies,
Yeah.
right, from calling you on an unsolicited basis. Unfortunately, the DNC doesn't say that people who make a living out of scamming people cannot contact you, right? So the recourse you can take, I think I'm going to be a bit of a wet blanket by saying that there's really nothing much we can do. Just be vigilant, right? You should be
Mm-hmm.
able to tell by now, as all of us should, what's a scam and
Yeah.
what's not. So if you
Yeah.
receive a call with very nice soothing music playing in the background, followed by somebody telling you that they're calling from the court or from the Ministry of Health, wanting certain bank account details from you, then I think the best thing to do would be to say, okay, bye. I'm going to put down the
Yeah.
phone. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think these government agencies actually, multiple government agencies and large public corporations have actually put out advisories as well to say that please note that, for example, the police never ask for certain types of information. So if you receive a call from, allegedly, quote unquote, the police, and they ask for such information, then it's not us. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think fair amount of common sense involved here.
Mm.
Sadly, it's quite hard. Right. Just as a reminder to our participants, you can submit questions, continue to do so to the questions pane on your screen. I'm going to move on, okay? I'm going to, because we've got these legal parameters in mind already, as discussed by Whaley. So and I'll add that the recent survey I mentioned earlier on by a certain global cybersecurity company actually revealed that 95% of people across the regions are now still working from home following COVID-19 outbreak. Some interesting statistics maybe is that 55% actually say that their employers have provided them with devices to work from home, only 55%. And for the remaining 45%, only 1/3 of these businesses have provided their staff with antivirus software to use on personal devices for work purposes since the transition began. And 26% of employees say that they do not have a separate room for all family members who need to work from home. So sometimes if there are some work calls, talking about with personal data being trotted out and discussed, then it's a little bit of a red flag there. And 73% of employees have not received any IT security awareness training from their employers since they transitioned to work from home. So I think webinars and talks like that may come in a little bit handy. And 53% use a VPN when working from home, which means that 47% actually don't. And 27% say that they have received malicious emails that use COVID-19 as the main topic of interest. So that's something to be aware of as well. Yeah. So with all of that in mind, let's discuss how the rise of work from home culture might actually make it hard for employers and employees to fulfill their legal obligations to protect personal data, which is already hard, right? But working from home makes it even harder, perhaps. How might protection of personal data be difficult with the rise of work from home culture, Wei-Li? And what are the dangers and challenges we should be aware of?
Thanks for the question, Jeannie. I can think of so many risk areas, but if I were to have to discuss them all, I think we will be here till tomorrow morning. So maybe let's just
key ones,
yeah, the key ones, right, that are more common to most of us. I think the most obvious threat or risk area comes from how our home internet networks are not protected. If you work in the office and you work for a decently large company, the odds are that the company will have its network secured, encrypted, protected, right, by various solutions and software that they've procured. But if employees now are scattered all over the place working from home, then there might be a obvious risk insofar as they are now using their individual net connections, individual networks that do not get the protection that they would usually have gotten had they been in the office, right? And I think that's made a lot worse by how work from home sometimes doesn't strictly mean work from home. Work from home can sometimes mean work from Starbucks, work from McDonald's, work from Coffee Bean, work from Wi-Fi at Paragon, right? And if you don't work from home, but instead go out to a public area to work and then use the public area's Wi-Fi connection, you could be exposing yourself to a lot more risk because that network or that connection is now being shared by a lot of other computers running on that same traffic. Now, of course, if everybody on that same network minds his or her own business, then maybe not that much of a risk. But if you happen to have a hacker sharing that same network with you, right, or somebody who is just snooping around the network, and that person is actually IT trained and able to sort of remotely access devices on the network, then you've got yourself a problem on your hands, right? So the risk is there. The risk is always there. Of course, it's not all the time that you find yourself sharing the same Starbucks network as a hacker, right? But we're lawyers and we're in the business of, talking about risks and mitigating risks. So I would say that the risk is always there, right? And it's not a risk worth having. Okay, so that's an obvious challenge. So what can I, as an employee or as a worker, do to sort of mitigate that risk if the company that you work for issues you with a work VPN? Please just use it.
Yeah.
Okay, a VPN is a virtual private network, and those of us familiar with a VPN will know that some companies will rig their systems up in such a way that if you don't access the VPN, you cannot access your work email. You cannot access your work cloud storage. You cannot access your work intranet. Okay, so if you have a VPN, please use it, because that's one of the most straightforward ways to make sure that the data that you exchange over the network is secure and encrypted. Okay, I think this other thing that most of us don't pay attention to enough is to restrict work activities solely to your work device. I think we need to resist the temptation to do work on our personal device, right? So don't say, okay lah, today it's more convenient for me to bring my MacBook Air out because it's lighter. I'm just gonna work on it. The computer that my office gave me is this clunky IBM laptop that I don't want to carry around. Tempting to say that or think that way, but try not to, right? Because it's always better to confine work-related information to one device, especially if that device that the office has provided you with comes equipped with the antivirus software, the anti-malware solution, or the VPN protection, right? So why take the risk by doing your work on another unprotected machine? Now, so, of course, some employees I know or I've spoken to tell me, I got no laptop. Usually when I work from the office, I use a desktop. How? Now I need to work from home, right? I did encounter this question from a client before, and our advice to the client was, well, then you will have to, if you don't want to procure laptops, right, you will need to help the employee bring a desktop home, no? Right? It's a bit of a cumbersome solution, right? But hassle that you take now is going to be well worth it, because you would definitely want to avoid a situation where the employee doesn't have a work laptop or a work desktop to work from at home, uses their personal device, commits a data breach. The hassle that you have to do later when the PDPA comes in to investigate is going to be far worse than hassle that you deal with right now in helping your employees bring the desktop home. Right? So I think that's one thing that a lot of us actually can do. Restrict work only. Okay. Now, the other obvious challenge that I can see coming out from work from home situations is when you conduct meetings over, for example, Zoom. Zoom meetings are very common nowadays. I'm sure all of us would have been on, at the very least, one or two Zoom meetings, if not more. And it's common for people to record Zoom meetings so that they can visit the contents of that meeting, right? Rather than take meeting minutes, maybe the secretary may think, hey, I just record this one so that I don't have to furiously type minutes during the meeting. I can play back this Zoom meeting at 0.5 speed later, 2 days down the road, so that I can take minutes more effectively, right? Now, be very careful when you record meetings, especially when the meeting involves people not only from your organization, but participants from outside the organization. For example, you have a meeting with clients, right? They're not part of the organization. Have they given consent for their likeness and their image to be recorded? Remember what we talked about earlier when we said an image of a person and the voice of a person can amount to personal data, because you can actually identify a person from these right? So please be very careful, especially when you are recording meetings, and ask yourself, is there a need to record it, right? If there's a need to record it, where do I save this recording? Do I save it nilly-willy on my home laptop or on some unprotected cloud drive, or do I make sure that I save the recording on the a drive or a storage facility that's secure or encrypted? Okay. Now, the other thing that you may want to take note of is, you know how people are very now into taking screenshots of Zoom meetings and then posting them on social media. Wow, I went for a meeting
every
today
day.
So yeah, right. Oh, I attended a Zoom event with so and so. 20 of our company's biggest clients attended this celebratory Zoom meeting to sort of celebrate our company's anniversary, right? I think people should really scale back on doing that. Because the same problem occurs, right? Some of these people who attend the meeting may not have given consent for their data, their likeness, their image, their faces to be used that way. And even if they have given consent to being recorded during that Zoom meeting, they may not have given consent for you as an individual to take that screenshot and then put it on your
Social
Instagram or
media. Yeah.
your social media sites, right? It's important to make sure that when we conduct and participate in Zoom meetings, we try to minimize, so to speak, keeping any permanent record of it, because that kind of record may amount to what the PDPA considers to be personal data, right?
And also not
Um,
forgetting that the internet never forgets.
yeah, the
Yeah.
internet never forgets. You may get pushed down to the third or fourth page of Google search results when you're no longer trending, but it remains there. Right? It
Yeah.
remains there. Even if you
Yeah.
delete a site or delete an image from, let's say, your social media
Correct.
page, it's what we call cache data. Right?
Yeah.
And somebody well versed in snooping around the internet, like myself, for example, will be able to find it if he or she wanted to. Right? So the internet never forgets. So it's a very good point, Jeannie. Yeah. So all
Okay.
right. So we move away from Zoom meetings to talking about something that's a bit more insidious, a bit more sinister. I'm sure we are all familiar with the term phishing, right?
Yes.
Phishing, phishing, not the phishing, right? Although I think inspiration was drawn from that, right? Phishing, if you don't know what phishing is a term used to describe a malicious sort of online activity.
Yeah.
Hackers or scammers try to bait you into clicking a link. They'll send you this over email, right? And they'll bait
Yeah.
you into clicking it. And when you click it, your computer will give up personal data stored on your computer to whoever it is orchestrating this phishing. And these links, they will sound very innocuous and very innocent one, right? They will say things like, "Oh, you've won a flight ticket. Please click on this link to redeem it." Or the scammer or the hacker could well be masquerading as, let's say, somebody from your organization, right? "Hey, I am the Chief Technological Officer. I'm writing to you because we suspect that your email has been compromised. Please click on this link to validate your identity." Right? They could be posing as somebody from your company, getting you to click on a link on the pretext of it being, let's say, an important link that you need to click on. So please be very, very careful about this. I think the most, so to speak, I wouldn't say the most surefire, but I think the first line of defense we all have against this kind of malicious internet activity is to really remain vigilant, right?
Yeah.
And I think Jeannie said earlier, use a bit of common sense, right?
When in
You
doubt,
see,
when in doubt. Yeah.
yeah, when in doubt, err on the side of caution. When you see an
Yeah.
email that doesn't look right, right? Or when you see an email that doesn't seem to be along the lines of what's being routinely sent to you, don't click on anything inside it. In fact, don't even open it, right? Because sometimes phishing emails are so sophisticated that the moment you open the email, right, the data from your computer gets sent across in an unauthorized manner. So please be vigilant. If you, let's say, receive an email from somebody claiming to be chief data officer of your company, and you think that is suspicious, now don't reply to that email, don't open it. What you should do is to write a new email to this person and say, "Hey, did you send me an email, let's say an hour ago, or timestamp when and when, asking me for certain things, or with this subject item?" Always verify, always check. Okay. Now, if you work for a bigger and more structured company, sometimes your IT department may send you regular updates, alerting you to phishing activity that they know about. Okay. And I think most of us are guilty at one time or another of ignoring these updates. Wow, I've got so much work to do already. Stop making me read your nonsensical updates. Okay? No, don't. I think it's important for you to go and look at these updates, and then so that you know what exactly is going on, and you don't fall prey to some malicious emails that might actually be going on or being circulated at that point in time. So please read up from your IT department, so that you if you come across a phishing email that fits what's being talked about in the update, you know to avoid it. Okay. I think last point about dealing with phishing is to understand your company's internal reporting policy. If you ever do come across suspicious email or internet activity, know who to turn to, know who to write to, right? To report these incidents. Don't just ignore it.
I'm laughing, because some companies may not have.
Some companies may not have, which then of course brings us to something that we can talk about later, right? Setting up a viable and a structured reporting line.
Yes,
but we can
we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Now, of course, if your company has a structured reporting process or policy, then if you run into what you think is suspicious internet activity, report it. Don't sit on it, or don't think, somebody else will report it, right? Why should I be the one doing it? I'm already very busy. Don't report it, right? Just like if you see a crime, you should report it. Call the police, right? Same concept applies. Why? I'll tell you why. Because data protection is a shared responsibility, right? That pervades rank and file. It's not the sole responsibility of the IT department. It's not the sole responsibility of your CEO or the data protection officer. It truly is a shared responsibility. It's just like how you and I, as citizens of our country, have a responsibility to be vigilant and to report crime when we see it happen, right? So think about it from that same perspective. And if you are still not convinced, I'll leave you with this thought. If your company breaches data obligations, gets slapped with a large fine, profits will go down, so will your bonus at the end of the year. Okay? Yeah, think of it from a self-preservation point of view. I must help my company, make money, and I must help my company steer away from potentially being slapped with a huge fine because of data breaches, right? But jokes aside, at the end of it all, I think we must all come to the realization that as employees, as workers, we all share a responsibility to make sure that the company steers clear of potential data breaches. Yeah.
Okay, good. That's quite a bit. There are some questions that have come in the meantime.
Okay, sure.
Basically, I'm just going to maybe group some of them together. First is, if consent is given for recording a Zoom meeting or a webinar, can an organization subsequently release it or share the recorded video to the participant? And after having handed over the recording to the participant, would an organization be still held liable if the participant circulates it, maybe put it on his own social media? Yeah.
Okay, good question. Now, consent is a rather tricky creature, right? Now, besides, and I think we didn't kind of mention this earlier when talking about consent, because we did want to start this webinar off on a more general basis. But now that this question has been asked, I think it's a good time for us to talk about how when an organization obtains consent, the organization must also inform the person from whom they're collecting the data what the organization is going to use the data for. Okay, so for example, if I run a blog shop and you are my customer, Jeannie, and before I collect your data, I tell you, hey, I'm going to be taking data from you. Do you consent to me doing this? I must also tell you what I, as the blog shop, is going to do with the data. So if I tell you from the outset that I'm only going to use your data for the purposes of sending you the order, right? And for the purposes of sending you future marketing materials that I think may be relevant to you, I will be breaching my data obligations if I do something with your data that's not within the scope that I initially informed you about. So for example, if I take your data, Jeannie, and I go and sell it to a third party, okay, then I would be breaching my obligations because I didn't tell you at the outset that I will sell your data or I will pass on data to a third party, right? So I this is relevant to answering the question that was put forth to us, because if you, let's say, conduct a Zoom meeting and you tell your participants before they sign up for the Zoom meeting that, hey, I'm going to collect, I'm going to actually take photos of the Zoom meeting or record the Zoom meeting. If you want to send this recording to all participants, you must, at the point of getting their consent, tell them that this is what you're going to do with the recording.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can't just say, hey, I'm going to record the Zoom meeting for my internal audit purposes or my internal reference. If you just say that, and then down the road, you disseminate that recording to all the participants, you would have breached your data obligations because you never told these participants beforehand that that's what you're going to do. Right?
Okay.
When you get somebody's consent at that consent gathering stage, it's important for you to very clearly delineate, right, the scope of how you are going to deal with or what you're going to do with the data. Okay, and I hope that answers the question, right?
Yeah, it does. And actually, for okay, but sort of well, because we know that it's now a new norm, working remotely. Actually, I'm going to refrain from working from home because actually it's remote working, like you mentioned. It could be from Starbucks. So a company intending to move to the cloud, right? One participant is asking, what would be some things to take note of with in relation to data storage, especially cross-border kind of related issues, since data center is can be located elsewhere. Yeah.
Okay, good question. I think when it comes to the cloud, my $1 million piece of advice to everyone running a business would be to not use the free version of the cloud.
Yeah.
If you're running a business, don't use Dropbox free. If you're running a business, don't use Google Drive free. Pay for an enterprise service, because the enterprise versions of cloud storage solutions will come with an encryption capability.
Yeah.
The simple reason is being this: if you get caught by the PDPC storing data on a free unencrypted facility, you would immediately have fallen short of your PDPA obligations, right? But on the other hand, if you pay, you can still run the argument to say, look, I paid, right? I opted for an enterprise solution where data is being encrypted. Okay, so if you are going to have to store things on the cloud, which I understand is the norm for most businesses nowadays, right? Then please make sure you pay for a dedicated storage service where there is proper encryption. That's the most important. Now, I think, Jeannie, you also mentioned something about a question being asked in relation to cross-border transfer of data, right? If you work for an organization or a company that has different branches in different countries, and if you envisage a situation where your customers' data may have to be sent from branch A in country A to branch B in country B, then first, you must make sure that when you obtain consent from whoever you are collecting data from, you must make it a point to tell them that, look, when I deal with your data, I may have to send it, right, to other organizations in other countries. Now, interestingly, right, and I think this is straying a little into detail, the PDPA requires companies who transfer data out of Singapore to other countries to make sure that the country to which they are transferring the data to has same, comparable, if not more stringent data protection laws than the PDPA. Yeah. So I cannot as a company, transfer data to country X if I know for sure that company X has no data protection laws or has very lax data protection laws. Okay, so there's an obligation on my part as an organization to do a bit of due diligence and to check, hey, can I transfer, let's say, data to Hong Kong? Does Hong Kong have a data protection regime that's as robust as what we have here under the PDPA? The answer is yes. So there has to be a bit of research done beforehand. And if you are not sure, then I think as a company, it might help to either do your own due diligence or to get a bit of legal advice, right? From in-house lawyers or from external counsel.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've spent enough time. We're almost flogging it, Horst. But before,
we have to move on. We have to move on.
but there are so many good questions that came in, right? So yeah, but I think we need to move the discussion along. So are there actually any professions and industries, really very quickly, that need to be especially careful when implementing remote working culture due to the nature of the information they have to handle? I know previously you spoke about nonprofits, sometimes charities, beneficiary data is very sensitive. But apart from that, anything else that comes to mind?
I can think of a few offhand. Now, for example, let's say if you are in healthcare, you run a clinic, right, and you deal with very sensitive information such as medical records, health records, then I think yes, that's an example of an industry or a profession where you must exercise more diligence, so to speak, right? Lawyers, for example, right, when we deal with a client information, client data that can be quite sensitive. Counselors, therapists, right? Professions that deal with very sensitive customer information. I think these are all examples of industries or professions that might have to pay a bit more attention to their data protection obligations. But that having been said, I hesitate to say that these industries, or I hesitate to kind of single out industries that need to pay a bit more attention to data obligation, because at the end of the day, all organizations, regardless of what industry you're in, you have an obligation under it, right? And it's a myth or a misconception to say that, I don't deal with medical information, I don't deal with income information, I don't have to pay attention. No, that's not true, because remember what we talked about at the very start of the webinar, any sort of information from which you can identify a person is personal data. Even if you're dealing with things like email addresses, physical addresses, right? If you fall short of protecting them, if you leak them, well, then you may find yourself in a bit of a rut. And I think I have an example maybe to quickly share with you. Sometimes these leaks may not be intentional. I've worked with a client who runs a gym, right? And they got into a bit of a trouble. Of course, I won't name who. They got into a bit of trouble because they run, so to speak, personal training classes for some of their customers. And if I sign up for personal training, what I must do is walk into the gym. There will be a tablet there. I need to key in my name, right? To register, not to register, to sign in for the session. And after I key in my name appears in a list of all other people who have signed up for personal training. And that list is there for everybody to see. If I walk into the gym, I look at that, I kepo lah, right? And I look at that monitor, I'll be able to see everybody who signed up for personal training. Look, the gym didn't intend to leak the data, right? I'm sure they didn't. But this became a concern because a member complained and said, hey, I'm not comfortable letting the whole world, or rather the whole gym, know that I signed up for personal training. And PDPC actually looked into this, right? And issued the company a warning. There was no fine, right? But a severe warning was issued. So I think this ties in with my point about how every company or every organization needs to be vigilant, right? Not just sensitive information.
I suppose that company, maybe that gym probably invested in privacy screens after this.
Yeah, they took away that system where they could have a computer facing everybody for people to sign up.
Okay, so all of these actually sound like significant challenges. So I think we're going to now inspect what can employees do to protect personal data belonging to themselves or others while working from home or working remotely? Because I think the office space, that kind of environment, is no longer the same. It
Right.
could be Starbucks, it could be in a crowded home with other family members. So
Right.
any pointers for that, Wei?
I think we've talked about that along the way, and some of the key
Yeah.
points that we discussed earlier would be, for example, to not use your personal device to work, restrict work to
Mm.
only work computer. One thing I can think of right now, if your work computer tells you to update your software or to update your particular version of whatever anti-malware solution your company has subscribed to, please update it. Don't ignore it and
Yeah.
then tomorrow, update next week, right? And you never update it, and as a result, the protection that it's giving your computer is not updated. Right, so please update these things as you go along, especially when you're prompted to do it. Now, I think it goes without saying that you should take privacy very seriously. Don't go and share passwords with other people. Huh?
Correct.
Don't stick a post-it on your computer that says password to this computer is password 123. A lot of people do that because they're afraid that they may forget their
Forget.
password.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's not that much of a risk if you are working in the office. But if, like I said, you are going out to Starbucks to work, right, or going to a public place to work, then if you open your laptop and the whole world can see that your password is password 123, there's an obvious breach of security, and you really wouldn't
Correct.
want
Correct.
it.
Yeah.
Um,
Again, I think a lot of these are supposed to be common sense. And they're
right.
actually not new. Even
Hmm.
before the age of COVID-19, actually, these are age-old lessons that have been passed down through the generations ever since the internet existed.
Yeah.
But for some reasons, people are just still not heeding them. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times people think that, look, it's not on me. Even if
Mm.
something goes south, I'm not the one who's going to be punished. The
I
company
won't
is
be
the
so
one who's
yeah. Yeah.
fine. Yeah. Or, but you see, right, Jeannie, and to everyone who's listening, things don't happen until they happen. Right. So don't take privacy for granted. Now, I think one thing that has kind of struck me in recent times, especially with all this zooming going around, is how we share screens a lot on Zoom, right?
Yes.
When we are in a meeting, we share screens, right?
Yeah.
And when we share, let's say, a document. Now, you've got to be really careful because you need to ensure that whatever you are sharing on the document doesn't include personal data of your clients and your consumers, which you are
Mm,
obligated to
mm.
protect, right? Sometimes you may only want to share part of a document, but you unintentionally share also another part that contains
Yeah.
sensitive information. Right? Or worse, I think some programs, such as Zoom, allow you not only to share a document, but to share your entire desktop.
Mm,
And there could be a situation where you are intending to only share document X, but it so happens that you have documents A, B, and C open on that same desktop at the same time. And voila, right? All the participants in Zoom not only will be able to see document X, but also ABC. And if ABC contains sensitive information, then you would technically have breached your data obligation,
yeah.
data protection obligations. Yeah, so be very careful when you are sharing things on Zoom. I think a good rule of thumb, which I abide by during Zoom meetings, is I will close windows that are not necessary. I will close all
Mm,
windows and all documents that are not necessary for that particular Zoom meeting so that I don't inadvertently share other windows. Think about it this way. You won't keep your WhatsApp chat window open during a Zoom meeting, right? Because
yeah. No, no,
yeah, you
no,
don't
cannot.
want yeah. So I think we should apply that same principle, right?
Okay, yeah. So we're gonna move on to talking about how, what about companies or employers then? What can companies do to protect personal data belonging to their employees and clients? So if I can offer some tips to help employers and businesses stay on top of any potential IT security issues and remain productive even while staff are working remotely. I think a couple of pointers would be that, you should really ensure that your employees have all that they need to securely work from home, and
Right.
and also to know who to contact if they face an IT or security issue. Schedule basic security awareness training for your employees, because from the looks of it, remote working is here to stay. So I think that might be a worthwhile investment as well in your employees. Equip them. Right, and maybe just take key data protection measures seriously, including switching on password protection, encrypting work devices, and ensuring data is backed up properly, and ensuring that your devices and software applications are all updated, and make sure to install proven protection software on all endpoints, right? Sometimes free ones may not be good ones
Yeah.
may not be free, and really just to ensure that you have access to the latest threat intelligence, if possible, to bolster your protection solution, and just be a little bit more well-read. And I think picking on something that Wei said earlier on, to basically, it doesn't really harm to do some research as well. Right. So just wanting to take this opportunity to pose a question from the floor to Wei.
Sure.
And I think this comes from somebody from a nonprofit organization, that we often face requests from donors to identify the beneficiaries to ensure that donation in kind or cash are put into a good cause. What are the safeguards so that we can meet the interests of the donors and beneficiaries all the same without compromising any data, compromising in terms of data protection? Yeah.
I think this is tricky. What
Yeah.
I understand from this question is this: if I'm, let's say, a charity, I receive donations. The donor wants to know who the money went to, right? Now, I think the situation is less tricky if the money went to, let's say, an organization. Okay, so if
Yeah.
the organization, if the money went to a pet shelter or a home for migrant workers, or a shelter for, let's say, children, then it's okay to tell the donor it went to an organization, because an
Yeah.
organization's name is not technically personal data protection. It's not technically personal data under the PDPA, but it becomes a lot trickier if the donor is asking you, hey, I want to know exactly who the money went to. Okay. Now, one way to do this would be to reach out to the person who receives the money to ask the person, hey, are you agreeable to us disclosing to the donor, right, that you receive certain funds from us? If the person receiving it says yes, then I suppose you could go ahead. But I think we want to avoid tricky situations like that. So if you run a charity, it is best when canvassing for donations or accepting donations to make it very clear as a term of the donation that we, are not in the practice of disclosing names of individual beneficiaries. I think that's the best way to do a charity. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And there's another question. The recent talking point shows more and more, and will increase even more after the program. Talking point, I suppose, is a program on TV. I don't watch TV,
Right.
but I'm just reading out the question.
Gini, can
Yeah.
you
So
keep me for a while? I've got a technical glitch. Hold on. Huh?
okay.
Sorry, I'm back.
Yes. Okay. So the ringing phone is yours. Okay. Okay, I lost you on video actually. Yeah, okay. Hi, welcome back. Yeah, okay. So this question from the floor is that the recent talking points show shows more and more employers secretly installing stealth monitoring programs on laptops.
Right.
For especially, maybe company issued devices and all that without the employees knowing about it. Is this allowed, and what can employees do?
Now, again, no straightforward answer to that. Now, as employees, the information that we give up to our employers is considered personal information. Okay, so that's one line of defense. It helps to know that it helps for you to know that just because you are working for a company doesn't mean that the company has a free reign over the data that they collect from you. Okay, but of course, that having been said, the company is also entitled to collect data from employees. If not, how am I going to administer payroll, right? How am I going to know where to credit your salaries to? So in an employee-employer relationship, the obligation for the employer to protect data remains the same, right? No difference from the obligation that the employer must exercise in relation to, let's say, a customer. Okay. Now, I think the question herein is really whether or not it's legal for or proper for an employer to install these kind of, so to speak, surveillance devices. Tricky. There technically isn't, so to speak, a law that expressly says employers can't do that. I mean, think of that as a CCTV also, right? I mean, what's the difference between a camera on your laptop as opposed to a CCTV within your office? So there's no law expressly or explicitly saying that, no, we can't do it. But I think legality aside, it may raise certain issues concerning privacy. Because if you've got surveillance devices fixed onto laptops and this person opens his or her laptop at home, then you see you run in a situation where the employee can effectively see what's going on in a person's house. You see.
Yeah.
If you find yourself in a situation like that and you're uncomfortable, I think you should raise it to HR or raise it to the company.
Yeah. Because the question is actually itself, pardon me, but the question was not very clear to me. I'm not sure if the person asking the question is talking about spyware actually, which takes us off on a totally different topic altogether already. And I think again, I think it really depends on the factual situation. So we might have to discuss that in another forum perhaps. Yeah. But I think, thank you, Whaley, for actually trying to address it. But the question was rather vague to me. Yeah. So anyway, with all I'm just doing a quick time check. We do have about 15 minutes left, and I do hope to cover 2 scenarios and maybe talk a little bit about data breaches before we round up tonight's discussion, which has been super robust actually. So without further ado, I'm just going to put this scenario forward, right? Because now work from home, right? So we call a lot of food delivery services. I won't give them free publicity by naming them, but I think we all know. and our personal data are collected, right? And clients' contact details, address, payment details, and all that. How should, if I am a small home-based food delivery service, how should I ensure protection of my customers' data? Really?
Okay, so I think if you were a small business and you're collecting customer data solely for the purposes of sending them stuff, right, knowing where to deliver the food to, please just make sure that you use the data only for that purpose. All right. Don't take that data and then go Google who this person is to see whether or not this person is good looking or not. Who is this person who ordered 50 turkeys from me? Wow, so rich. I want to see whether or not this person is truly a millionaire. No. I mean, just do what you need to do with the data, i.e. use it to deliver the product to that person. Okay. Don't go and snoop around. Don't go and deal with the data in other ways that the customer wouldn't have expected you to do so. Okay, I think the other practical point is whatever information that you have collected, you need to store it, understandably so. If you need to store it on a computer, on a local drive, then I think the very least you can do is to ensure that this computer is protected with a password, right? Uh,
Yeah.
don't leave the computer around for people to pick up or steal. If you are going to store data on a cloud drive, for example, on the internet, then I think we did talk about this earlier. See if you can purchase an enterprise sort of storage solution where there is encryption.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't store it on a free facility such as Google Drive free or Dropbox free. And understanding of these enterprise solutions is that they're quite affordable nowadays. Yeah, you
Yeah,
don't have
yeah.
to.
Very competitively priced. Yeah.
Right, you don't have to fork out like you don't have to go and sell your kidney to let's put it that way to afford
It's
Dropbox
morally
for
debatable.
yeah. So I think if you're running a home business, these 2 points should be sufficient to protect you, lah. Right? Don't go and
Okay.
do nonsense with the
Yeah.
data and store it on some
Yeah.
platform that's encrypted. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, okay, in summary, if I'm a home-based food delivery service provider,
Right.
just make sure that I don't use the data outside of the defined remit that I'm well permitted to do so. Yeah. Okay, what about if changing scenario? What if
Hmm.
what about HR management consultants with regular team
Right.
meetings to discuss proposals and plans to meet the demands of client companies? How should they ensure protection of their clients' data, Wei?
Well, I think that the same principles apply. Really, and you may think, yeah, wow, am I sitting in this seminar to hear somebody go on about how the same principle applies regardless of industry? The truth of the matter is that the PDPA makes very little distinction between industries, right? All organizations, like I said, as long as you're registered, you are bound by the duty to protect the data that you collect and the data that you deal with. So if we are talking about HR management consultants discussing proposals and plans, I think the same principles are relevant. Please make sure that again, when you store data, you store it on a secured facility. If you are
Yeah.
going to have to store it on your local drive, please make sure your machine or your device is protected. Yeah, so I don't see. I mean, my personal view is that the obligations in this situation won't differ that much from any other setting that we've talked about so far. Yeah.
Okay. Good,
Hmm.
good, good. I think now we have well, hopefully with the application scenarios, people are a little bit clearer.
Right.
And have gotten a hang of it. So now we have to, the discussion is not complete if we don't talk about dealing with data breaches.
Okay.
So the foreseeable or the unforeseeable, unfortunately has happened. And
Right.
what happens if there is a breach? How can businesses minimize the effects of such data breaches and, well, hopefully even remedy these breaches? What is
Okay.
your take? Yeah.
Uh, Thanks, Jeannie. I think the first and foremost consideration that all businesses should have at the top of their minds would be this thing called a uh, incident response plan. Uh, what
Okay.
to do, right, when there's a data breach. Instead of having everybody scramble around like headless chickens during a breach, having a plan would help make it clear to everybody involved in management what their individual roles and responsibilities are. Right. So, for
Mm.
example, what does the chief legal officer need to do? What does the PR person need to do? What does the IT person need to do? What does HR need to do? Right. Now, closely associated with an incident response plan is also a reporting structure. I think we did talk about this earlier
Yeah,
during the
we did. Mm.
is there a person or a team that employees can go to report suspicious activity or data breaches? It's always important to make this person or this team known to everybody in the organization. Because if you don't, nobody will know who to turn to if something happens, right? And as a result,
Yeah.
breaches will go unreported. And if they go unreported, they may perpetuate, which then opens you up to a larger amount of exposure down the road should PDPC come in to investigate, right? So two things, have an incident response plan, and two, have a clear breach reporting, so to speak, protocol. Now, I shan't go into the details of what having a plan or having a protocol encompasses, because I don't think we have the time for that. But if you are a business listening in on this, right, and you don't yet already have this plan, or you don't yet already have this protocol, you may want to either look up the resources that the PDPC has on its website, right? Or you may want to consult a data protection expert, such as a lawyer, who will be able to help you structure these kind of processes and protocols a lot better. Now, of course, if assuming you have these things in place and a breach happens, the first response that you may want to have is to plug whatever gaps there are, right? If, let's say, for example, the breach involves an inadvertent leak of client information on your website, you may want to even consider doing something as drastic as to shut their website down for the time being, so the breach doesn't, continue to happen. After you've plugged the gaps and you've closed those holes, you will want to start an investigation immediately, right? To find out what caused the breach or who caused the breach. Okay, this is all the way an assessment, and this investigation is important because it helps you learn from the incident, and these learnings are very vital in ensuring that the same kind of breach doesn't happen again, right? An assessment also helps you identify what the gaps are, right?
Yeah.
For example, if you do the assessment and you realize, oh, this was caused by a malware, or this was caused by ransomware that was initiated by a hacker from, let's say, some other country, okay? Then you may say, okay, in order to prevent this same thing from happening next time, I will need to, purchase more robust anti-malware or anti-hacking kind of solutions. Okay, so the assessment part is important. Now, there is also one key thing that you have to do in the event of a breach. Now, if you have a breach where 500 or more individuals are affected, for example, if the data of 500 or more of your clients have been leaked, touch wood, okay, or if you think that this breach is going to cause significant harm or is going to severely compromise the privacy or the data of your clients, you have an obligation to inform the PDPC. Okay, you need to do it within 72 hours of the time the breach was discovered, so to speak. Okay,
Don't keep quiet, yeah.
don't
Hoping that nobody realizes, because people will realize.
People will, and if the breach has already been so severe as to affect 500 people, the odds of one out of these 500 filing a complaint to the PDPC is substantial.
Super.
Right? Yeah, and you don't want to have to deal with the PDPC only when they come knocking on your door. I think transparency helps a little here, right? So for more information on how you can actually file a incident report to the PDPC, I think you can look at the PDPC's website. We shan't go into the details here. Right. There's also one school of thought which says, look, if a data breach has happened, as a matter of goodwill, you may want to kind of reach out to your clients and be transparent to them about it, right? And tell them, look, something has happened. We are taking all required and necessary steps to contain the breach, right? You may want to tell them what kind of information has been compromised and what hasn't. You also want to let them know what the extent of the breach is and how they can contact you if they have further concerns about the safety and security of their data, right? Doing this as a stopgap measure will, I think, goes quite a bit in terms of allaying their fears and concerns, so that you don't eventually have to deal with 100 angry people filing complaints to the
Yeah.
PDPA. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to stop them from filing a complaint, but at least you are transparent with them and you let them know at the very first instance what happened, what has been done, and what's going to be done to protect their data.
I
Right?
totally agree, because I've been on the receiving end of one such email in recent times.
Oh,
And
no.
yeah, I know. No. But really, that email, which exactly comprises the stuff that you recommended, it comprises,
Mhm.
it really did inspire some confidence, and which concerns lie in the sense. And after the matter, there was a follow-up email actually that explained what eventually happened, what was the cause of it that led to the lapse, and another apology, and what has been done to damage control, which I think they got away quite okay. Like there were no major upheaval after that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
don't underestimate the importance of a timely response. Don't take
Yeah.
the mentality, okay, I'm going to wait till I sort it out before I tell people what happened and how I did to sort it out. Because by then it would be too late.
Correct.
And if you are a startup or if you are a business who and you don't actually really know what to do or what to say in the event of a breach, it would make sense, I think, to reach out to somebody who has the experience in that area,
Mm,
possibly a lawyer, right, or a data protection expert, because
mm,
these people are the ones who will be able to guide you in the right direction, lah.
yeah.
I think it's better to spend a bit more resources to deal with it rather than to have to, pay a hefty fine down the road for not only breaching your obligation but also not dealing with it properly, right? Yeah, it's a
Correct.
double whammy.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for it, Whaley. So again, time check, last 3 minutes. I think we have, well, actually we're supposed to go into Q&A, but of course I've been asking questions along the way,
Yeah.
weaving them in. So, but I think we have time for one last question. Okay. And I'm
Thanks
just
for
going to ask this question. Yeah, it's trying to paint it. So this question comes from someone from a social service agency that runs a children home.
okay.
And he or she says that we usually have a retention policy for cases that have closed after a certain number of years,
Hmm.
that needs to be disposed of. But is there any valid ground for the case files to be retained indefinitely? Like, say, for the case notes to be able to be retrieved years later for mitigation purposes, sometimes to save the client's life. So,
Right.
are there exceptions, Whaley? Yeah.
Okay, good question. I can't speak on behalf of other industries, but I think different industries are regulated by different regimes. For example, I shall speak on behalf of lawyers because I'm one myself. The Law Society actually stipulates a certain number of years in which we as lawyers should retain client data, right? So I can't remember offhand how long that it is. I need to go and check the guidelines. But the regulating authority will say, look, you have to retain client data for this amount of years, after which you are free to destroy them. I think the medical profession does also have a certain set of guidelines, how long healthcare professionals need to keep client data for. So if you are telling me that you are working for a social service, you may want to check in with the relevant regulatory authorities. I'm not super familiar with that, and I want to conclusively tell you whether or not there's a mandated minimum period of time.
Yeah.
If there isn't something prescribed by law or by regulations, you may want to then check with your own organization's internal, so to speak, data management policies, right? Internally, what is the guideline? Are we keeping it for 3? Are we keeping it for 5? Keeping it for 10 years?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Alternatively, I think if as a last resort, they can also go to the PDPC and get a guidance, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
They'll be
Seek
more.
guidance.
They're actually
Yeah.
very helpful people. So don't think of them as taskmasters who only come after you when something goes south. They are very, very,
Policemen.
yeah, they are very open to answering queries about data protection policies and obligations. So yeah, make use of these resources that they we have put out there for you.
Okay, right. Thank you very much for that. I think it is about time we bring our webinar to a close. We've had very robust discussion. Please remember to download the useful resources regarding the issues discussed today. And again, they can be found at the Files tab on your screen. We really hope that our webinar on working from home and the PDPA was useful for you. And for more information about personal data protection, you can browse the PDPC's website at pdpc.gov.sg. Scan the QR code. Your feedback will also help us make future webinars more relevant and useful to you. So I hope that you will leave today's webinar, and giving us your survey feedback as well. We really will appreciate it. For more information about the COVID-19 laws and relevant concerns and how to navigate them, please visit the Cove-8 at www.nus-cove8.com, a website created by a group of NUS law students who saw the need to support the community. So thank you very much, Wei-Li, for spending the evening with us. This is Jeannie signing off on behalf of the Law Society, Pro Bono Services, and the CDCs. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you. Bye-bye.